Well, the term's finally coming to an end, so not too much left to do. Take the final, turn in your term paper, and get the homework and any cleanup items. If you see yourself missing something, by all means, turn it in. Whether it's a homework comment or whatever. A zero is pretty hard to overcome. I mean, an F is 50%. A zero is worse. So anyway, um, just go ahead and get what you've done and the per the syllabus. I don't hold back on uh, you know downgrade things for you know late credit on distance. So anyway, 72 questions. So it's not open book. You'll have 1 hour to do it. So if you're not kind of hustling, you're not going to get it done. And if you're having to look things up, that's not going to be a good plan either. The good news is if you have paid attention to the class and go through this review, you should be in pretty good shape. You shouldn't have any troubles. So I hope you learned something through this term. I mean, this stuff isn't really rocket science, but some of the stuff is if you don't think about it, it'll just kind of creep up on you in terms of personal finance stuff that you'll make. It's easy to make bad decisions in personal finance just by neglect or silly things. And one other thing too, that especially right now, you're seeing all this stuff about the whole FTX and all this crypto stuff. Keep in mind that people have agendas. People who are screaming that they lost all their money. Remember, we talked about investing and speculation. Crypto is great, but maybe Bitcoin. Bitcoin's still in the speculative thing. But any of these other things, especially with some of these screw exchanges, maybe not Coinbase or some of the leaders, but anyway, FTX wasn't one of those. FTX was a scam, and people who got screwed on that. Anyway, there's other motives going on behind this whole thing, and not all crypto is bad. But that being said, crypto is not necessarily investment at this point. It's speculation. It's going to be a great thing for personal finance, a great thing in terms of getting some of the friction and some of the fees out of the thing. But because of that, there's a tremendous amount of resistance from some of the big banks and other people who've made money off of all that friction and putting themselves in the middle of transactions. And hopefully things will go away and it'll all work out. All right, so what I'm going to do is I've got the questions in front of me. I'm going to give kind of a summary of the question and then talk about some of the potential answers, and it should be pretty straightforward. You'll probably find some redundancy in the questions, which is fine. But it means if you don't understand a concept like liquidity or something, it's just going to beat you up. Liquidity is is the ability to turn money into cash, so that's important. But the other important thing is you don't need everything liquid. You want some money tied up in long-term investments because they earn more interest. So you need to balance things. And anyway, it's a challenge, but it can be done. Okay, we talked about insurance things. We talked about, for example, what a beneficiary is. Beneficiary is that person that's designated to get the proceeds from that process. So it doesn't say anything about acting on your behalf. That'd be like somebody under a power of attorney or something like that. This is just the person that doesn't have any special responsibility other than being the recipient of the funds that are going to be coming their way on your passing. We talked about bonds. Bonds are kind of a tricky item. I've had bonds in my portfolio, but not now. Specifically because interest rates are so low. Bonds may be attractive again now that rates are going up, but bonds basically represent not an ownership position in a company and certainly not an ownership position in a government, but they represent a basically debt capital, a way of one of those entities to be raising money, but it's just a loan. You are giving them a loan and they're paying you dividends and doing all that. There are some times when there's features within bonds where they can be turned into stock or converted, hence the term convertible. So if you've got a convertible bond, it means that there's some mechanism within that bond to turn it into stock. Call feature, another thing about bonds, not something you want. Doesn't do much for you as the holder of the bond. What it means is if they're paying you a certain interest rate and that gets to be too expensive for them, or for whatever reason, it gives the bond issuer the ability to just call the deal off, send you your money back, and say, nope, we're not going to let this thing go to maturity. Here's your money. Move on. The deal's off. So, not something you necessarily want. We talked about on insurance policies. If you've got certain items or category items that are of high value, you want to make sure that they're covered in the policy. If not, you want the policy modified. You want to, it's going to cost you some money, but it's, if you want insurance, that's what you've got to do. So you've got to make sure that that contract is amended, and typically they call it a rider being added to the contract. So anyway, a contract rider is kind of a modification addendum to the contract. And in this case, it would recognize the value of certain items to make sure that you have the full entitlement. We talked about mutual funds. Great way to invest. Mutual funds, for the most part, they can invest in a number of things, but primarily they're invested in stocks. And the reason why people do this is because it's easy. They're very customer friendly. You have a fund manager who supposedly, and well, they're supposed to have a fiduciary responsibility. They're supposed to be acting on in your best interest to manage that money that's given to them, and they'll typically do that by executing trades and selecting stocks and doing all that kind of stuff. That being said, you're in this business to make money, and so if you're paying them a commission, that's coming right out of the front. Typically, you don't want to do that. And there's really no need to do that since there's so many mutual funds available. So when you're in the market looking for one, you want to make sure it's a no-load mutual fund, meaning there's no front-end load, no commission charged. Anyway, so that's what they refer to when they say a no-load fund. That means no commission on the front end. Sometimes there's a back-end load, but that's a different thing and not that common. We won't go into it. We talk about whether it's a growth stock or, well, growth is the word that we're looking for here. But let's say you have a mutual fund, or it can be a stock, that are rapidly growing companies, higher revenues. They're not going to be paying a dividend. Again, they're not giving the profits back to the investors, not at this point. Investors in growth stocks, they make their money by the stock price going up, right? Mature companies that have what would be termed income stocks, they pay a dividend. So anyway, it's important to kind of know. And again, growth stocks are more aggressive because they're, especially now, they get beat down repeatedly lately because they're borrowing money also. And when money costs more, when it's more expensive to borrow because interest rates are going up, it means that it's hard, and they're not as they're not as established as some of the big companies. But that's literally where the growth is. I know I'm saying growth over and over again, but growth is important if you're trying to, amass capital, make money, generate wealth. Mutual fund invests in companies in the same industry. Okay, so you can get mutual funds that they can, it's the sky's the limit. They can set this thing up however they want. If you want to, for some reason you think some part of Asia is going to take off, Central America, whatever, or you think it's a sector that's going to go, you think it's a certain industry that's going to go, you can find a mutual fund that fills their portfolio with those types of stocks and then puts that product together and then advertises it for people like you to find and go, oh man, this is exactly what I'm looking for. So anyway, those things are typically called sectors, right? Sectors within an industry. So if say you're going to be in high tech or defense or whatever, could be marijuana type stuff. Don't do that. I invested in a thing called, what was it? Hippie's Disappointment. It was some type of weed that had no THC, whatever that gets you high. It had none of that, and so that's why it's called Hippie's Disappointment. Is this strain that was supposed to be perfect? This was a few years back. It sounded like the best thing ever. Just the medicinal part without the drug issues, if that's what you're looking for, and it got clobbered. So I've never had very good luck with biotech or anything medically related. High tech has always been good up until now, and then it was not. But anyway, things bounce back. Mutual fund. So how's that work? Just like I said, they pool the money of a lot of investors, right? And so it's safer than investing in individual stocks, theoretically. I mean, and it is. It'd be hard to argue that it's not safer, because rather than being in a certain company, you tend to be involved in multiple. Well, you are involved typically in multiple companies, and so again, let's say you pick a sector or a country or something like that. Rather than just own one company within that sector or within that location, you own, maybe a few, and so you could be right, and the company or the sector takes off, but your poor company, the particular one you chose, gets beat down. And if you own the individual stock, that would be bad. But if you own multiple companies within that country or within that sector or within that whatever, you can still do well because the other companies that you own kind of took up the slack. So, especially in the high-tech sector, I mean, yeah, you got to have some skill and some luck and get some guidance, because 9 out of 10 of those things fail. It's not good. That's why it's so tough for those guys to get loans, and that's why selling stock is really the only way they can generate capital, because banks aren't going to loan to businesses that have a 9 out of 10 failure rate. Okay, let's say we didn't talk too much about this, but let's say you've got an insurance policy and you've got some, creepy child your child who's under 18, and they say they see on Facebook a house is abandoned, and they have a huge party and they destroy somebody's house, and anyway, they were your child. You have vicarious liability. So it's kind of sad, kind of funny, depending on whether you're the parent or not. But yeah, you can be held responsible for the actions, especially the actions of a minor that's under your care. So you'll see that in some of the policies. They'll talk about vicarious liability. Sometimes we talk about stocks that are. We talked about the different types of orders, and like I said, I haven't traded with Twitter recently. I don't know that it's traded on the public market again yet. I think it's more of a limited private issue. But anyway, if you've got a stock that's got some sort of volatility and you want to sell that stock, but you think it's still got some momentum, but you're not sure, and let's say it's trading for $35 right now, but you think it's going to go to 37, maybe 39, something like that, you could go ahead and put in, rather than sell it at the current price, you can put in a sell order for 30, 37, and if it reaches that price throughout the day, it'll sell when it gets to that price. Conversely, you can also put in these are different forms. These all kind of go in the definition of limits. You can also use stops, which is stops and limits are not exactly the same. A stop would be, let's say this stock is same stock. It's going for 35. You expect it to go higher. You could put in a trailing stop and say, I think it's going to go higher, but in case it starts dropping, I don't want to lose any money, so I'm going to put in a sell order for, say, 33. And if it happens to touch on 33, descending through 33, then I'm going to go ahead and sell and preserve some of that money. But if it continues to go higher, goes to 37, goes to 39, then that 33 order would never be executed. And so you go ahead and maybe move that stop up again, and when it's at 39, put it at 35, and just keep ratcheting that up. Sounds good in concept, but emotions get involved. I've done this as well, and you go, let me just adjust it a little bit more, and then it drops. And anyway, But computerized, that's almost a form of computerized trading. Very light computer involvement on that one, but sometimes that is good to kind of get the emotion out of it. It's kind of like eBay where you get wrapped up in this concept of winning. No, you didn't win anything. You bought something. And the same thing's true with stock. If you're chasing something and you get wrapped up in greed and everything else, you can make some bad decisions. Sometimes it's better to think deeply on it a little bit and then set the trades out there and let it happen and take your mind off it for a while. Anyway, stocks that sell for less than a buck. My always advice is don't get involved in penny stocks. I've always lost money on penny stocks, and here I am again. I've got a penny stock right now. It's fun though, and it's not tremendous. Again, this is speculation. Do not put your life savings in it. This is not investing. This is pure speculation. But the reason why penny stocks are typically a bad deal is because the company's probably on the verge of failing. That's why it's trading for so little money. Plus, a lot of the SEC regulations, they're probably not traded on a public exchange anymore, and a lot of those regulations don't apply. And very susceptible to pump and dump internet hype, and people manipulate prices. And anyway, but it can be a fun thing to do. Getting back to insurance again. We all know that everybody has got a legal requirement to have at least liability insurance on a vehicle, which means that companies that do business, say, insurance is normally, it is regulated at the state level. And let's say you got some drivers that are not good. They got a DUI or two, but they still have their license, or they're just, getting a lot of accidents. There still has to be somebody to insure them because they haven't taken away their right to drive. And if they are going to drive, there's a legal requirement for them to have insurance. So what happens is that these people are thrown into a assigned risk pool. Sometimes you hear, like up here, they've got the SR22 filings and things like that. The different names, different states will call this, but it means that if you're an insurance company, an auto insurance company doing business in a state, that is part of the condition of doing business is you've got to accept some of these people and offer them insurance. Now, you can charge them quite a bit of money. So, but anyway, that concept of having to offer insurance is called assigned risk pool. A will, obviously, something you need to have once you have people dependent upon you. It's not for you. It's for the beneficiaries, I guess, in this case. But it's also just, if you die without a will, you die intestate, and you get caught up in the probate court, and it's just a complete nightmare. Probate court will still process your will, but if you have a will, it's just sort of a, stamp process, and it's just expedited through the process. If you have no will and the court is responsible for dividing up your stuff, yeah, they're not going to be in a big hurry. The lawyers are going to charge a ton of money because they can, and it's all your fault because you're the one who never had the will. So, you don't really have an advocate at that point, and certainly not you because you're dead, and your family's going to be the ones going to be screwed. So don't do that. Have a will, and by a will I mean something that's actually processed through the legal system with some sort of a lawyer, either a lawyer, itself or a paralegal. But anyway, it needs to conform to the state guidelines per a will with the signatures and the witnesses and all that. Doesn't have to be super specific. It can be a completely simple will. Probably the simpler the better, because that way it doesn't need to be changed, but you need a will. Here's one about a lady buying some stock. Holds it for a couple years, so as you know, a couple years is going to be long term. Anything over a year is long term. What you're going to be looking at is the price that they bought it for, the price they sold it for, any commissions they had to pay if they did, dividends, if there was dividends paid, that would also be towards the positive, and you would calculate that into the profit. Pardon me. Okay. This guy's investing in something high risk. He's looking at getting a large profit in a short amount of time. He's doing penny stocks. He's doing crypto or whatever. He's speculating. So it's a speculative stock. So the other choices are things like T-bills are definitely not speculative. But again, you're not fooling anybody. You are losing money if you are buying T-bills. You may not actually lose a dollar amount. You're going to say, oh, no, I started with $1,000 and now look, I got $1,002. But what can you buy with it? About $900 worth of stuff. Inflation ate up whatever profit you thought you had. And oh, by the way, the only other person who thinks that you made a profit is the IRS, because they're going to want a chunk of that because you made a profit. They don't deduct inflation against the investment. Here's a lady. She's got, well, long and short of it is deductible. You know what a deductible is. Whether it be on health care or a vehicle or whatever, it's the amount you got to pay before your insurance kicks in. And so by manipulating that deductible, and I mean manipulating in a good way, increasing the deductible in most cases, if you can afford it, your payments will go down considerably, because obviously if it's $1,000 deductible, you're not going to be doing frivolous, filings. The insurance company knows that, so they save a little time there. And then also they don't have to pay as much, even though, for a car, there's very few things you can do for, under $5,000 or so in terms of vehicle damage anymore. Usually much higher. What's supposed to happen with gold? And again, I'm almost to the point of taking this question out, but I thought I'd leave it in here just because it's kind of interesting. This is the common, sentiment is that, easing of international tensions or disinflation is said to cause gold prices to decline, because gold is looked at, something that goes up in price when people panic, and because the commercial uses, and because of maybe competition with Bitcoin as a store of wealth and some of the other things, gold has just been flat. So anyway, but the question remains, and the rationale for investing in gold is that it's supposed to be stable and supposed to go up in value in times of turmoil. Estate planning is related to wills and all the rest of that. It has to do with after you're dead. So can affect some things in terms of managing your property. So yeah, I'd say after you're dead, there's estate planning. I mean, the planning bit, obviously, if the question was estate settlement, yeah, that would be definitely after you're dead. But what estate planning implies is that there are things you can do while you're still alive to plan your estate. And so, not only is it dealing with the property, but it's also if you have a business or something, like setting that up, or your property itself, setting it up so maybe it's partially transferred to the beneficiaries even before your death. And thinking about those things. Some people, it's kind of grim. Some people want to avoid it, but it's far better off, especially if you're still healthy, to discuss that stuff when you are healthy, and not have your final moments of your life consumed with doing estate planning. And just the peace of mind to have that all resolved earlier in your life or your relationship is much better. Financial leverage. When we say leverage in a personal finance scenario, we're talking about borrowing money to invest. So let's say you're in the stock market and you're going to borrow money to buy stocks. That's speculation, plain and simple, and probably not very bright, because we've talked about margin calls and the rest of that before. If it's in real estate, it's kind of the smart way to go. So, yeah, some friends and I were having a discussion about this the other day. The person I was talking to was saying, well, I don't want any real estate because it doesn't increase in value very much. Well, it's kind of short-sighted, especially if you're using borrowed money to do it. And I'm not saying get completely over-leveraged here, but let's say you're able to buy a $300,000 piece of property with $30,000, and let's say real estate's going up maybe, say 3% per year. Well, 3% times 300,000 is, I mean, yeah, 3% times 300,000 is what, 9,000 bucks, and you've got a $30,000 investment. That's that's almost like a 33% gain on that investment, because the asset, the 300,000 is what's appreciating, and the amount of money you're paying interest on is 30,000. So your return on investment is through the roof using that sort of logic. So anyway, it's about controlling a large asset with a small amount of money. And I can't think of too many things I do that with other than real estate. Certainly not crypto. And that's where a lot of people, crypto is probably worse than stocks in terms of leverage. And when you see big swings in some sort of asset class, it's probably because people were leveraged. They had borrowed money they don't want to sell, but they're forced to sell to cover their call, and they get clobbered. So, for the average individual, yep, people regarding retirement. The thing about retirement, it's kind of tricky. It's very hard to plan for because you don't know how long you're going to live. And you're under. Sometimes you're under this naive impression that I'm good. I've got Medicare and Social Security. Yeah, you've got a base level provision there. Employee pension, typically not. That's not the standard plan anymore. People are opting for more income and less in the way of benefits, or whatever. What came first, whether the employer cutting back on benefits or the employee opting for a higher salary and sacrificing benefits. But anyway, the trend ends up being the same thing. And then thinking that your costs will, daily living will decrease significantly once you retire. Not always, especially if you want to travel perhaps or do some other things. The other thing about life expectancy is kind of funny, and it's good news for us, for most of us. If you're, say, somebody says, well, the life expectancy, and I don't know the exact numbers, but let's say it's like 82 for a male. Actually, if you get to be like 60 years old, your life expectancy is quite a bit higher, maybe 88 or something like that, because when you're 60 years old, you're not gonna succumb to infant mortality. You're not gonna die as a baby because you didn't. You're probably not going to take up heroin or meth or anything like that that's going to lead to a early death at this point. You're probably your days of boozing it up and driving around and all these other activities that tend to kill people in their youth that cause the life expectancy to only be 82. Those things are behind you. So your life expectancy, your time of retirement is probably actually going to be longer than you think, which is nice. But anyway, keep that in mind. So here's a lady. She's got the expensive photography equipment on her insurance policy. She thinks she's covered. She knows she's not because she didn't have a rider, right? Or it can also be called a floater. So in this one, I actually have in parentheses rider. So if you know the term rider, you're good. Keep in mind, though, that they will also call it a floater sometimes. Again, it's one of those marketing things. Different companies will call it different things. I need to push it up here a little bit. We're only on question 22. This guy died without writing a will. What's that called? Intestate. The court that deals with all that, I don't need to push up. We're fine here. Is probate. That's the state process that does it. So you go to probate court, and that's why, certain times in your life you need to come up with a new will, and moving states is one of them because it doesn't apply. We looked at certain funds that will maybe rebalance your investments as you get older. Again, if you're young, you probably should be in more aggressive growth type things. If you're older, theoretically, you should be in more stable income type things like I wish I would have been about 6 months ago. Anyway, um, if you're not in one of those, or if you're in one of these funds that's kind of automatically managed like that, that's called a life cycle fund. A life cycle will reallocate your balances as you get closer to your retirement date. Here's something about bonds, and this is where I was talking about if interest rates change, it does affect the bond, because bonds can be sold. If you buy a bond, you can hold out till maturity. Say it's a 20-year bond, you can keep it till 20 years, or you can sell it on the secondary market earlier. And that value on the secondary market is going to be greatly affected by the current interest rates, what the interest rates are now compared to when you bought it. So if the interest rates have gone up, your bond is not going to be as attractive. It's not going to sell for as much because people could buy a bond at the current market and get more interest. Whereas if you had a bond that was paying a high interest rate and interest rates go down, your bond would be worth more. But the status we had been in up until the last year or two was that interest rates were quite low. And so there was only one real scenario that could happen, and that would be interest rates were going to go up and your bond was going to be lessened in value. And then there's also things you can do. The bonds I have had were short-term bonds, and I did pretty well on those. And but short-term bonds, I think they were like 6-month maturities. So it was pretty nice, and there wasn't much interest rate risk because they're only trying to forecast 6 months out. Okay, yeah, so we talked about that. Yeah, we talked about what happens if you die without a will. Your state laws of descent and distribution become your will. So whatever it says in the state, that you may not want it, but it goes to this child equally, or your will could actually mimic the state thing. It may coincide, it may agree with it, but just because you have a will means that process will go quicker because it doesn't have to be reviewed with the same level of effort. It can just be executed. Liquidity, what we talked about with liquidity means turning things into cash. And so real estate, yeah, not very liquid because it takes quite a while typically to sell it, unless you're going to sell it at some bargain price to some cash buyer. But all those things spell that you're going to be getting less for the property. If you want to get the maximum amount, it's going to go through the typical process and take some time. Why do you have life insurance? To take the place of the breadwinner. So the person bringing in the money, whoever that would be. Here's another one about selling stocks. And again, just calculating the return, fairly easy. Here's somebody buying stock that's going to grow. Again, that's going to be a growth stock. Here's a guy who's buying a car. He's looking for airbags and anti-lock brakes and all that. That is what he's trying to do is reduce his risk, right? He's not avoiding the risk. The risk is still out there that the accident's going to happen, but you can reduce the impact of it. Assumption of risk means that the insurance company is taking over part of that, which is happening, but what you're doing with just the safety features is the reduction part. How do they do life insurance? Well, they use mortality tables, exactly what I was talking about. They know exactly this person at this age, and they'd love to have your medical information because it refine their data. They'd just love to have whatever information that relates to your lifestyle and everything else to figure out what your chances of dying are. So that all factors into these mortality tables. Again, it's pretty grim work, but that's how they determine how much insurance is going to cost. But the good news is when you need insurance the most, when you're young and healthy, it's such a long shot of you dying that the insurance rates are so cheap. So you're silly not to have, you know, at least in the term stuff, a fairly ample insurance policy. This guy just graduated from college. Young, what should he be in? Yep, probably growth stocks, right? Not corporate bonds, not government bonds. Commodities, that's a whole different thing. Commodities would be like, buying pig bellies and orange juice futures and things like that. Fun stuff, but again, speculation. Money market fund, nope. Way too conservative, not going to keep up with inflation. Most health insurance companies, where do most people get their health insurance? Through their employer. It's not through the Affordable Care Act or any of that kind of stuff. That just serves a specific number of people. Older people have Medicare and other things. The poor people without much money would do Medicaid. But most people that are working, they get the most affordable and effective insurance through their employer, through a group plan, through them. 10% return. That's a pretty good return. Are you going to get that on T-bills? Nope. Corporate bonds? Nope. Options? Options that's a whole different strategy. Futures and options. You could get way more than 10%. You could get nothing. So that's more of a skilled investment type thing. And zero coupon bonds? Absolutely not. You wouldn't get that. But one choice in here, stocks. The stock market in the long haul historically has gotten about 10%. So if you're going to invest in a mutual fund, you have to review the prospectus, which is a good thing. The prospectus is kind of the rules of the road. Tells what the fund's hoping to achieve, what their rules are, what they can and can't do with your money. Inflation risk is the risk that investment does not keep up with prices. So that is a real risk. I mean, if you're just trying to tread water, but even treading water, you're sinking. You're adding more and more weight, and you're gonna drown. So inflation is a real problem. Hopefully they'll get it under control, at least to a point where you can exceed it with traditional investments. An annuity in its basic form just means a series of equal investments. In terms of a personal finance product, it's typically offered by insurance companies, and they consider it the opposite of life insurance, meaning the only way you can collect on a life insurance policy is by dying, as opposed to an annuity where you actually get paid to continue living. When you die, the annuity stops. So the longer you live, the better the deal. Here's a lady. She owns some stock, individual stock, and she's gotten what they call a proxy in the mail, which you get all the time. So stock, if you own stock, you own part of that company, and you have voting rights. Now, the problem is that it's, depends how you define democracy here, but basically one share equals one vote. So, if you've got 30,000 shares, yeah, you're probably going to get asked to come to their, annual shareholders convention thing or whatever else. If you own like 6 shares, you're going to get a thing in the mail with a proxy saying, hey, this is what we're going to be discussing at the shareholder meeting. Who do you want to vote on your behalf? Because, you're not even going to get a free water at the convention. You're not even going to be admitted. So because you don't have that many votes. So they still legally need to ask you, but they're just asking you to sign your votes over to somebody else to vote on your behalf, a proxy. This guy, he's making some money, but what's he doing? He's super smart. He's putting money aside at the very start of the month. and his investment is just like a bill. He's paying himself first, which is a great strategy. Here's this guy, 10%, and the company matches 5%. So employer-sponsored retirement programs. So different companies, this is completely non-standard. This has to do, when you hopefully get an offer from a company. I mean, well, this really only applies if you go to work to a soul-crushing corporation like many of us will at some point. Anyway, one of the ways that you evaluate their package, their remuneration, their whatever, their pay, is not only the bottom line but also benefits. But related to pay is also what's their retirement type thing. And now the days of a full retirement, unless you're maybe a teacher or federal employee or something like that, that's not typically going to happen. But if it's a private company, you want to know what they're offering in terms of their 401k, because it'll typically be a 401k, and there should be some sort of match, some sort of incentive, some sort of even stock ownership program, something like that. And if not, it makes the other company, the competition, look more attractive. So, in addition to knowing what the salary figure is, you want to know, and it can be significant. Like I say, I would say it was a good company when they hired me. They were given 10%, and it wasn't even a match. It was just 10% of your salary went into your retirement fund. That was sweet. And what made them a bad company was when they came back a couple years later, they said, we're not doing that anymore. We're going to give you 4%, and you have to put in 6%. And then they lied to us and told us it was a better deal because it made the company stronger, which somehow was better for us. And anyway, that's a company I no longer work for. And no regrets. I mean, companies, like anything else, whether it be products or anything else, they all have kind of a timeline and an expiration date. And right now, maybe Amazon's good, whatever your feelings are, but I'm sure they're going to start to suck at some point, and some other startup company is going to come in there and push them aside, and they'll be the next Kmart, or even, I don't know where Walmart is on the continuum right now, but I don't think they're on a positive vector anymore. So anyway, companies kind of have a life expectancy and or expiration date, and I think employers do too. And so it helps to be a bit mobile and always looking at your options as you go through your career. And it's not that, well, it's very untypical now to stay with the same company for your entire career. And it's not necessarily comfortable, but if you're financially squared away, personal finance-wise, and not job locked, not staying with that horrible company just because you need the paycheck and you can't even make it a month without it, that's where you don't want to be. So that's why you want to be, personal finance, you want to be squared away. It's not about greed. It's about, flexibility, dare I say liberty, the freedom to not have to work for some a-hole because you can't afford to go a month or two without a salary. It's nice to be able to switch companies, or at least think about it, have that freedom. If you don't switch, to do so because you weighed all the options, not because you're forced. Negligence. What happens in terms of insurance when we're talking about negligence? So let's say you do something and it caused somebody to get hurt. So you were negligent, right? You are, let's say somebody falls over. I mean, in Alaska it's not going to happen, but I guess it could. Let's say you had a swimming pool and, somebody falls in your swimming pool and you didn't even have a fence. I mean, you were negligent. And so, again, and right now I'd be trapped in the snow. I mean, I've got the house I've got in Germany. It's the only house in the village with a swimming pool. It's kind of funny because it was owned by a uber rich guy when I bought it from him. I mean, Lamborghinis, Ferraris, the whole bit. And he's still a pretty good friend of mine, but for some reason he wanted a swimming pool. It was completely impractical. I only used it a couple times because it was so stinking cold. But anyway, how'd I get here? But if you do something and somebody hurts themselves, it's not going to be good for you. If you're found to be negligent, it's going to be even worse. So take reasonable care and you won't be found negligent. Take no care at all or exacerbate the situation And if you get sued, it's going to go much, much worse. So, um, one of the advantages being a limited partner. Remember I talked about investing in projects. Um, if you have just limited involvement, and this doesn't, it's not an informal thing. It's a legal status. If you're a limited partner, that means that your liability is limited to the amount of money you have invested. And so, like I said, I was involved in a real estate transaction one time, and I was actually a full partner, and then I backed off and became a limited partner. And I'm very happy I did, because I would have lost a considerable amount of money, and I wasn't really exercising any management in the project anyway. So anyway, if you're going to get involved in an investment with direct money on a in some sort of investment, make sure you've got a limited legal representation or whatever characterization on the contracts, if that's where you want to be. It makes a difference. Peril. When we're talking about insurance stuff again, that's the cause of the loss. So what you don't want, there are some scams out there where people will sell you fire insurance, or cancer insurance. That's not good. What you want is you want all perils. I'm sick, I'm whatever, whether it's cancer or whether it's whatever, you don't care. The fact that you're sick is the issue. Or a better example would be a house. Let's say, the house is destroyed. Was it wind, hail, fire? All those things kind of happened. But because I had all perils, I'm covered for all of those. You don't want specific perils identified. But in general, though, the concept of a peril is the cause of what actually it did, what actually caused it, whether that be the fire, the hail, the smoke, all those things will do it. But you want an insurance policy that's broadly defined, that's all perils, if you can get it. Some things like earthquakes and stuff, they specifically exclude. And so that's why a lot of people got screwed a couple years back, because they didn't have the insurance they thought they did. Here's a lady buying mutual funds, long history of paying a dividend. So she's buying an income fund, right? Just like, remember we talked about, there's a bunch of other funds in here, and most of them say, maybe growth fund or global fund, which has to do with a location, or international fund, again, a location. But income fund, equity income fund. Equity would mean stock equity. Income would mean that it's paying dividends. So anyway, we talked about, I think we hit negligence and liability. The fact that, let's say, somebody comes on your property, manages to hurt themselves in spite of the fence and everything else, you may not be found negligent since you took reasonable care, but because it happened on your property, you're probably still liable. So liability is the broader thing. It can be made much worse if you found to be negligently liable. Renter's insurance, it typically covers the personal property. So if you have a place and a condo or something like that you're renting, and you want your personal property insured, that's how you do it. If the place burns down, your insurance company is not going to be paying to replace that condo. They're not going to get involved in that. They're only going to be concerned with your personal property if you're the tenant. This lady owns a home. She has a coffee maker that she knows is bad. She kind of let it go. So the peril is fire, but the hazard is that coffee maker, especially since she knows it's bad. That has a risk of fire since it's not good. Here's a lady. She's putting money here, money there. She's diversifying, right? Some in the stock, some in the bonds. So what is she doing? Diversification. So diversification is this gets back to why we bought mutual funds. Having a diversity of stocks in there, and you can diversify further. having part of your portfolio in real estate, part of it in regular stocks, a small part of it in crypto perhaps. All that's diversification. Even some gold perhaps. We talked about beta as related to the Standard & Poor's. So Standard & Poor's, this is a measure of volatility. And so since the S&P 500 defines beta, the beta of the Standard & Poor's is going to be 1 because it is the measure. A stock, if they say Shopify or something, is 1.2, has a beta of 1.2. That means it's 1.2 times 20% more volatile than the Standard & Poor's. Another question on liquidity. We talked about bonds and how they're rated. So a third party again, S&P again, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch is out there as well. There's a couple different companies that rate bonds, and that's their gig. That's all they do is they don't own the bonds. They just rate the bonds. And so AAA is their highest bond, all caps. So keep in mind, somebody says, oh, I've got a great bond. It's rated A+. Well, that's good, but that's not AAA. That's probably not, because I think A+ might be a Fitch rating. But anyway, a single A is nothing to write home about. In fact, when we're getting down into B's and certainly into C's, now we're into junk bonds. So, legal responsibility for financial loss, somebody else, liability. We talked about that. Here's a person that invested money over time, just a kind of a word problem, not a big deal. It'd be helpful to maybe have a calculator, but you could do it in your head if you needed to. Typical examples of life insurance proceeds. Yeah, you can do anything with it. Paying taxes, paying off the mortgage, funding an endowment, charitable bequests. You can do great things with your money if you have it, and and that you succeeded. You actually have a bit of a nest egg over, or even though your life is over. Here's a stock split. So sometimes what happens when the company, say their stock price is going up, and it's a $30 stock, and then all of a sudden it's a $90 stock, and then it's $300 or something. Sometimes it just becomes ungainly. I don't know that other companies have done it that much. I think it's either Amazon or Apple, whatever. One of those stocks is like $3,000. I only have a share or two of it. It's silly to have a stock price that's that high. Most companies, before it gets to that point, they would do a stock split. And maybe it'd be a 2-for-1. It can be a 10-to-1, whatever. So let's say you had, these silly shares at $3,000 a piece. They've clearly let the thing get out of control. But let's say they do a 10-to-1 stock split. What they would do is say, okay, we're reissuing the stock, and for every one share you had in our old issue, you now have 10 shares of the new issue, and the new issue are priced at $300. So you didn't make any money, really. It's indicative that there's some serious growth going on, but the act of the split itself didn't generate any wealth for you. But it's just a conversion thing to get the stock to a price that's more manageable and easier for people to deal with. Here's one: when a stock splits 2-for-1, you should expect the price to decrease to half its price, right? Here's a Standard & Poor's bond rating in default. So this isn't even junk. This is worse than junk. These are not paying the bills. If you invest money here, you should not. You're not investing money. You're investing in a failed company, a company that's supposed to pay a dividend that's no longer doing that, and that has a rating of D. So again, they can't even break down and give it an F. The grade inflation is pretty horrendous. Disadvantage of real estate investments: illiquidity. Tough to get the money out of there quickly. We kind of beat stock splits to death. Doesn't mean the stock value is going to go up necessarily. It just means that they're going to re-wicker it. Getting back to automobile insurance and things like that in an accident. If you're ever in an accident, do not discuss, who's at fault, who did this. Make sure, things are safe. But yeah, don't admit liability. Say, oh, my bad. I was, I'd had a couple cocktails and I wasn't paying attention. And yeah, no, that'll all come out. But you don't need to share those details. Which of the following is true? This has to do with mutual funds, about how popular they are. 87 million people have them. Nearly half the U.S. households have mutual funds. There's more than 12,000 individual funds available. So all big things. Mutual funds are where a lot of money is, because there's not only you, but there's also, pension plans and stuff where you say you're a teacher and the teachers have got some sort of pension fund. They may not tell you where that money is going if you're a teacher, and you may not get a vote or whatever, but the institutional investors, the people who are managing that fund for you, they've got that money typically in mutual funds. So that's where a lot of the assets come from. Greatest growth potential. So your choices here are a bank account. You're just going to be treading water, losing to inflation. Corporate bonds, maybe doing a little bit better. Some risk, though, since you're loaning to private businesses. Government bonds, very little risk, but not very little yields as well. And T-bills, just another form of government bonds. So common stock is the only one with a real growth potential out of that group. Here's one about investments with liquidity. So a checking account, super liquid. Government bond, yep, typically liquid unless you signed away, into some sort of time thing. But just a straight government bond, how they have it issued, it's pretty liquid. Savings account, certainly liquid. Preferred stock, yep, you can sell any stock quite quickly, settle in 3 days. Real estate, not so much. So. Here's a great one for this time. During inflationary times, there's a risk that financial return on investment will not keep pace with inflation. It's not really a risk. It's a certainty at this point. It's happening. I don't know anybody other than, Samuel Bankman-Fried who's outperforming the market. At least he was till he wasn't. Which of the following is true about term insurance? Protection only for a specified time. So again, if you're going to buy term insurance, there's no residual value. If you don't die, fair enough. You get no money back, but you don't really care. In order to collect, you would have had to die. Which of the following statements is false? So there's a couple answers in here. I don't like questions that are worded this way, but I put one in here. So which of the statements is false? So everything else should be true, right? Investors purchase mutual funds for diversification. That is true. Investors purchase mutual funds because they're professional management. Another good reason to do that. Professional fund managers work for an investment company. Yes, they're investment professionals. Even the best portfolio managers sometimes make mistakes. Yep, they're only human. And then here's one that says investors who purchase mutual funds are guaranteed a higher return than if they were to purchase comparable stocks. Nope, there's no guarantees in anything. So anyway, fairly straightforward if you can get above the false part. Which of these is correct? Bonds are a form of debt capital. That is true. Stock is a form of debt capital. No, it's an ownership position. Stocks must be repaid at maturity. That's meaningless. Stocks don't mature. It's an ownership position. You own them from now till whenever. Bonds do not have to be repaid at maturity. Oh, yes, they do. Bonds do not have to be. No, okay, you can keep it. Sorry, that's the incorrect one. And then interest payments to bondholders must be declared by the board of directors. No, that's not. So anyway, bonds are a form of debt capital. So a company, they want to generate money. They need capital, and so they can sell stock, which means they're selling, a portion of their firm, but they're also diluting their ownership position. If they don't want to do that, they can just get loans from people, which are the same as what a bond would be. And so that's how they're getting their money, is just by doing that. Getting down there to the end. Greatest need for life insurance, a household with small children. So singles living alone, nope. No problems, nobody to worry about. Singles living with parents, your parents are going to grieve for you, but there's not somebody, you're single, you don't have anybody, children or whatever. Dual income couples, yeah, it sucks, but the other person is going to be able to probably, get things going because they still have their job. The children, absolutely, that's gross when the Gerber baby life, where they have life insurance policies on your kid. That's just, it's creepy, The bad thing is your child died. The good news is here's 25 grand for something. True or false? You can depend on Social Security to pay your basic living expenses. No. I have some employees contract employees who can't make it by without some supplemental income. And then lastly, rounding out with auto insurance question. We know what collision does, right? Collision is for when you get in the accident and it's your fault, but you want your vehicle paid for. That's collision. Remember, liability only covers the other person's vehicle. What's comprehensive? Comprehensive are all those other things: glass breakage, falling items, vandalism, all that other stuff. So that's it. Okay, so that's about it for the final. I'm going to post this out on Blackboard, review it. The final is going to be open for a week. Get your assignments turned in, get your term project turned in, your homework. Just check through and make sure everything is ticked off, and should be good to go. We'll talk to you. Well, we won't talk to you again. Have a good rest of your college career.